Hey guys, this is a bit impromptu. I wanted to make a video. Usually I make a video when I come back from ceremony from overseas. I did one for the ayahuasca, I did one for the peyote ceremony. But I've never really touched on the smaller plants, the mushrooms and the LSD, or the reasons why I even jumped into this world. But I've been having a lot of conversations lately with people who ask me questions that I write a lot about the deep spiritual and philosophical side of it, the spiritual experience with the plant medicines, but I've never really tried to articulate it in a video. I've had a lot of sidebar conversations with people, but I'd like to touch on it. Maybe some people want to watch the video, or maybe they'll get more out of it this way. So basically, I've been asked how I got into psychedelics. And I recently had an interview with somebody who's writing an ethnography for his master's out of Norway. He reached out to me online and asked if he could do that interview and ask me some questions. And some of those questions I'll be reiterating the answers to in this video. But basically, the way it started was, a long time ago, I wasn't the greatest person. I wasn't very good to people. I was very egocentric, and my initial desire was to try and figure out how to jailbreak my brain, or enhance my own cognitive abilities. So I got on board with substances called nootropics at first, or nootropics. Basically, substances intended to brain function, health, and enhance your line of thinking. I didn't get much out of those, and the next step was, from what I'd heard, psychedelics that could give you this mind-bending, these experiences, help you think in different ways, bridge new neural pathways. So, I acquired some of these things, and I'm not going to talk about the differences between them or what dosing them does. Those are different questions for a different video, but I will get into what I did, what my experience was. I've had people ask me lately about bad trips and how to avoid bad trips. So my experience with bad trips is, if you dose enough times and you dose heavy enough, eventually you're going to have a bad trip. That's just statistic inevitability. But what I've also come to learn is that bad trips in the psychedelic community are, more often than not, they are lessons that just needed to be learned. A tendency that psychedelics have is to dig into your mind, into places that you have kept put away, that are typically not appropriate to be brought out into everyday life in public. Maybe you have some deep-seated traumas, or some secrets, or some things that you're not comfortable about, either with yourself or other things, memories. And what'll happen is those psychedelics like to go in and hone in on those things, and that's why a lot of the communities refer to these psychedelics as medicines, is because they make you deal with things that you usually wouldn't want to deal with. And that's also part of doing the work. When people talk about using psychedelics in a non-recreational sense, they talk about them in a ceremonial sense. They want to do work. They want to do healing. They, either by themselves or under the facilitation of someone else, a guided maestro that knows what he's doing, you will dose and you will enter those places in your mind, and you will work on things that you typically wouldn't be able to work on as successfully on your own, or in a sober setting. Now, in my experience, I didn't have bad trips initially. I had a lot of trips, from small, ranging up to medium dose to high dose. And when I got into reckless dose territories, when I started having bad trips, because I started to realize that I have an issue with relinquishing control. And that's actually a big obstacle a lot of people run into when they start getting into messing with the plants, is they will make you relinquish your control and your autonomy over your mind and how you think, and you need to surrender to that. And if you don't surrender, which most people have issues doing initially, you will suffer. You will experience suffering. You will have control taken from you, and that's an experience that, I don't want to say it's like an initiation, but a lot of people that continue to do work with psychedelics, it's something that you eventually need to be okay with, and it takes work, and it takes multiple, coming back to doing that multiple times to start to understand that it's part of the process. And it's okay to lose control in a controlled setting, if that makes sense. If you're in there letting the medicine do its work, it's okay to not be in control. Now, a couple years ago when I was getting into this stuff, I myself was still not that great version of myself that I used to be, and I came out of a very toxic relationship, and in the midst of the end of that, I took it upon myself to take a very reckless dose of psilocybin mushrooms, about 13 grams of a strain called penis envy, which for anyone in the myco community understands that it's almost a double dose of psilocybin content per gram than most of the other strands out there, or strains. And I had an awful night that resulted in what I want to call like early stages of psychosis. I had basically fractured my psyche, and I could not process the difference between what was real in this reality and what was being conjured in my mind. Like I couldn't discern the difference. There was a point where I was so fractured that I had left my apartment to go to my brother's apartment just down the street, because I had gone through such a traumatic experience alone in my apartment that I had seen some things and experienced some things in there that were really dark. And I reached out to him for help and company, and he sat with me through the night. And when it was time for me to go back over to my apartment, one of my friends came to escort me back home, and I was to the point where I was so fucked up that I couldn't go back into my own bathroom because I thought my own body was still laying in there, and I didn't want to see that, because then it would confirm what I was thinking. So I was pretty far gone. I was not in a good place, which is another reason that I take it upon myself to get involved with this community and these things, is because I know that psychedelics are coming into mainstream, and psychedelics are very different than marijuana. We have weed dispensaries popping up, and someone can take a bunch of weed and think they're gonna die, but they never do. But it's very different if, say, someone young or inexperienced goes into a mushroom dispensary, or even now when there's no dispensaries, if someone gets a hold of a large amount of these things and they think it's fun to take 10 plus grams or 10 tabs of acid, and they completely obliterate themselves, and there's no coming back psychologically from the damage that they do. I would like to be there to educate people or advise against that path, because there is real healing and medicine in the plants if you do them correctly. I often also tell people the difference between medicine and poison is dosage. 1 cup of coffee, you're fine. 10 cups of coffee, your heart's palpitating. That's not good. Same with anything else. There's age-old myths like you're gonna take acid and then you're gonna think you're a bird and jump out of a 10-story building. That is not true. That is not how these things work at all. But I want to help advise people against that. So, I have a list of notes here that I wanted to go over. Bad trips, a lot of times, are just lessons. They are, again, you go into a place in your mind where you have to deal with some things that you were uncomfortable with. But I recently had this conversation as well. It's not so much a bad trip as it is an experience that is unique to you that just needed to happen. I was then asked, how do you avoid bad trips? And what I tell the people who may be curious but they are afraid that they are going to have a bad trip themselves is your dose, your set and your setting. Obviously, those are coined terms in the psychedelic community, but your dose is very, very important. It's no different than, when you were 13 years old and you were sneaking alcohol. If you have a beer or a shot, you're fine. You are dipping your toe in the water. You are feeling the effects of what alcohol can do to you and how it feels. And there's levels to it. There's 1 beer, 1 shot, and then there's 20 beers, 20 shots, and you are drunk and wasted on that substance. And psychedelics are, I would say, no different in that regard. With 1 gram or 1 tab or even half a gram or half a tab, if you just dip your toe in the water and you get some experience with it and you understand how it feels in your body and with your mind, you can quickly assess if that substance is for you or not. Typically at low dose, I don't hear a lot of complaints from people. Usually people fall in love with psychedelics because of the euphoric way they make you feel, the way they help you process things, the way they help you get in touch with empathy, the way they help you think in new ways, a new perspective on things. There's no crash with psychedelics. They actually call it a glow, where you feel more aligned afterwards. There's a lot of good things if used correctly. So to avoid a bad trip, don't capsize yourself. Don't go out to the deep end of the waters, right out the gate. If you have no experience with a substance, don't take 6 grams. Don't take a heroic dose. As long as you dose responsibly, you should be just fine to avoid bad trips. I also advise this person that you would want to be in a space that you're comfortable with. The first time I ever dosed, I made it a point to sit alone in my apartment by myself on a day that I had off, and I just played video games. And I sat there and I played, and I just was kind of intuitive with my body, and I was just feeling, like whether there was a body high coming on, or if I was thinking in different ways, or if I could see the patterns of what they call breathing, when surfaces emanate or radiate their lines because your visual acuity is changing because the portions of your brain are communicating in different ways than they usually do. I was paying attention to that stuff, but I was feeling it out. But it wasn't so much that I was overwhelmed. So if you can do that, put yourself in a comfortable setting, take a dose that's not overwhelming, and so long as you are also in a good headspace. If you had a terrible day and you're mad at your significant other, don't go home and dose acid, because it's just going to bring up those emotions and you're going to have to deal with them amplified. And if you are not intending to do work with those emotions, then it's not going to be a good time. You're going to be in to do work. And you can do work or play with these things. So how to avoid what do I get out of it? This was recently asked to me. I've been asked, how often do I dose lately, and what do I get out of the experience? And my answer to those 2 things are, I honestly don't dose that often anymore. There's a quote that I like by Terrence McKenna. He's a famous psychonaut in the community. He said that once you get the message, you can hang up the phone. And I took that to heart, because to me that meant, after the 100th and something time, after different doses or different substances, if I kept coming back to the same thing and just reliving or relearning or being told the same lesson, you've gone past the point now where you need to take the substance, and you are now in the integration phase. And what integration means is when you take these substances to do work, what they do is they can show you what's going on, what you're processing, what your experience is, and then when you come out of the trip back into your sobriety, it's on you to implement the change that has been advised to you via the plants. So I got to that point. I know exactly every single thing in my life that I fucked up on, that I regret, that I wish I would have done better, things that I don't like about myself, things that I've come to accept about myself. There's a long laundry list of work and introspection that I had to go over and over and over again with the plants via either LSD, mushrooms, ayahuasca, peyote, whatever. The plants presented me my things to work on, and I worked on them. And I'm planning to continue working on bigger things down the road with different plant medicines, but I just haven't gotten there yet. So how often do I dose now? Honestly, it's just if it's any, it's recreational. I don't currently have any work that I feel like I need to be doing. And if I do dose, honestly, I like personally, I'll usually go a medium route. Because 1, I want to feel the experience, but 2, I don't want to overwhelm myself, and I don't want to have to revisit something that I've already worked on before. But the second part to that question is, what do I get out of it? What I get out of the psychedelic experience is almost like a euphoria. I don't want to call it just getting high, because it's more than that. You get to look into situations from a different vantage point. I get to rethink on things in different ways. I get granted different perspectives on things. It's a chance for me to reassess. I'm constantly in my head anyways, and I'm always thinking about things, and psychedelics amplify that. It's like if you've only ever seen the world in a certain way, and then you get a pair of kaleidoscopic glasses, and then you get to put those on and go through a day like that. It's just different. It's bright, and it's colorful, and it's fun, and it's whimsical, and it's nice. But you get to have that experience in your pocket. It gives you a sense of clarity, honestly. It gives me clarity. Whenever I dose the day after, I feel great. And what I also tell people is these things are honestly like minerals for your brain, or vitamins rather. You eat healthy foods, your body feels good. You eat healthy things for your brain feels good. If a substance promotes neurogenesis and promotes the formation of new baby brain cells and new synaptic pathways, like, that's good for your brain. That's healthy brain function. People have asked me about microdosing and dosing and how to do that. So the difference between macro and micro. A macro dose is basically anything heavy. You're gonna feel it, and you may or may not be capsized, and that's at your discretion. A micro dose is an amount that is small enough for you to take to where the medicine can do what it does without you succumbing to the trip. You are not going to see any visual alterations or, call them hallucinations, but your visual acuity is not going to change. You're not going to hear the echoey sounds. You're not going to be lost in thought loops. You're not going to be too talkative. You're not going to come out of your normal personality. Like, you are going to feel sober, but you're just going to feel better. And that's what the point of microdosing is people who usually want to microdose are wanting to treat or cure, in a lot of people's cases, their own anxiety, their OCD, their PTSD, their traumas. They want to deal with shit that makes them unhappy on a day-to-day basis, because when you take these things, twofold. One, they work neurological magic. They undo poor wiring and bad habits that have formed over time, that have accumulated via poor experiences that were not pleasant. They do that physiologically, but they also give you a different perspective on things. Like, if you are cut off in traffic, initially in your sober state, you might be like, fuck that guy. He wasn't paying attention. I have to account for everyone on the road. Man, this sucks. But when you take, I don't know, a quarter gram of mushrooms, and yes, you can operate on microdoses. It's no different than you have a cup of coffee. It's a stimulant, it's a drug. You've altered your state of consciousness. It's the same thing. Just lower the dose and you can do these things. If you take a microdose and you are driving down the street and someone cuts you off, you might have a different thought pattern. You might think, oh man, that guy's really in a hurry. Maybe he woke up late, and if he doesn't get to work on time, like, his boss will fire him. He's a really nice guy. He didn't mean to. He's, somebody startled him. You start thinking in different ways. You're more apt to give people the benefit of the doubt. You're not so negative. Your whole thought process is different. But that's macro and micro. A microdose, if you want to micro mushrooms, 0.15 to 0.25 grams. Try that every 3 days on, 1 day off. That's a basic micro regimen for mushrooms. If you want to micro LSD, take a quarter tab. Or that is, 1 tab is 100 micrograms. Typically, if your blotter paper has been submerged by your general chemist. Cut that into fourths. Take 0.25 micrograms, a quarter tab. Sit that on your tongue. Let it saturate transdermally for 20, 30 minutes. Do that 3 days on, 1 day off. every medicine affects someone, everyone differently. One may be for you, one might not be for you. The way I've heard it described is mushrooms are an organic feel and acid is a digital feel. And organic meaning you have like a body high, you feel ooey gooey, you're kind of warm and fuzzy, you feel real lovey, kind of giggly maybe, you're just happy. LSD digital, you feel sharp, everything's kind of feels a little more rigid, but you're very focused. There's a lot of energy in LSD. I've also heard it described as like when you take mushrooms in a medium to high amount, it's like you're strapped to the back of a rocket ship and it just goes where it goes. And with acid, you're in control of the rocket ship. It's still a rocket ship, but you're in control. My personal experience is it's the complete fucking opposite. Usually mushrooms, for me, I'm able to navigate a little bit better. High doses of acid have kicked my ass. Not to say that my worst trip was not a mushroom trip, but that was the 13 grams of penis envy that I got completely obliterated by. But high dose acid will completely put you in your place and let you know like just how powerful it is and how quickly shit can turn if you get caught under LSD's thumb. But again, that's abuse of a substance. You don't want to go high. Not that ridiculously high, unless you're under the supervision of a guide, a maestro, a facilitator, a shaman, all those things. Someone who's experienced in holding space for somebody who is traversing a psychedelic experience to work on trauma. That's the point of a ceremony, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting. If you're by yourself, it's not a good idea to just on a whim dose yourself to high hell. Don't do that. And I've kind of been asked this tangentially, the whole Andrew Aris thing, where'd that come from? That came from that bad mushroom experience. I didn't pick that name. You start getting into playing with consciousness, and when I had I'll call it a psychotic break, that name came down to me in what I could call or describe as a beam of light. I was in my head in a wasteland that looked like some kind of desert of glass, and there was just smoldering everything, and I was just sitting there, and there was like this death and rebirth event. I mean, to describe the trip in Cliff Notes was that I was in my bathroom letting that dose soak in, and I stepped in front of the mirror and I started to have a conversation with myself, and it turned into an argument. It turned into things that I was upset about. I was like confronting myself with the mirror. I was saying things out loud that I knew were true that I didn't want to hear, and they were so just crushing that it completely broke me to the point where metaphors manifested into reality and gravity turned up on me, and I was pulled to the floor on all hands and knees. And all I remember was, I'd see teardrops on the floor and I could hear myself yelling, and I couldn't stand up because the gravity kept getting heavier and heavier, and I just got sucked into the floor, and I couldn't stand up, and I felt like something was being my adversary. It was me in my head, and I was just beating myself up, and then all of a sudden it turned into I needed to be punished and judged and adjudicated, and that judge condemned me to eternity by myself because that's what I deserved for being so bad to people. And then it spiraled into really dark and demonic shit. Like when I went to my brother's house, what I described to him was that I met the Reaper face to face, and what the Reaper was a force of eternal death in a black lake, and I died in every way you could die. To get graphic for a second, I had the experience in my mind of having my throat slit. I was drowned, I was burned, I was mutilated, I was pulled apart. Every way you could think of dying, I died. And that was supposed to be some kind of eternal truth for me. And what happened was, this went on for hours and hours and hours. It was like in real time, it was like a 7-hour ordeal where I was just getting psychologically eviscerated. And then my phone went off, and it was one of my buddies. He just sent me a song from Spotify, and the ringtone clicked me out of that trip, thank God. And I just found myself like sitting on my floor, and I was like, my head was spinning. And but I had this recollection for a moment that like there was a death and rebirth motif that kind of transpired. Like Andrew was this bad person who did all these things. Andrew had to be punished. Andrew is dead now. The plant medicines went in there, did the work, the dirty work. And now there's this Eris entity that, again, I didn't pick this name. Like I was this newborn thing in an egg, and this fucking beam of light came down and was like, you're Eris now. And Eris is gonna do all these things better and be nice to people. And that's the spiritual woo-woo side, like if you want to get into that, which is gonna dovetail into my next topic here, is the spiritual side of these things. Like we have the Western side, the philosophical side, the analytical side, the rigid, hardline scientific. We want to know that these substances, the psilocybin fits right into the, serotonin receptors, the 5-HT2As. We can get real scientific with it, with the brain, and we like to think we understand why the psychedelics do what they do and how they induce synesthesia and how they have the parts of the brain talking to each other that create the effects that you interpret as a hallucination, whether it be auditory or visionary. And what we omit is when you go to the other side of it, the not scientific side, when you sit down and talk to a shaman and they start talking to you about spirits and consciousness and the universe. And the way I try to explain that to people, and what I write mostly about, is that the universe is full of information all the time, everywhere. It's always going on. You're here. That's indisputable. Whether it's solipsistic or not, whether I'm a projection from your mind, something is creating that experience. Whether you're the only one or everything around you is real as well, there's an experience happening, and that is undeniable. So with the universe going on, what I've explained to people is that psychedelics disrupt your default mode network, right? So you're driving down the street, there's a bunch of information happening all around you. There's blades of grass, there's leaves in the trees, there's road lines, but you don't pay attention to this information because it's not conducive to your existence as an organism. So when you take a psychedelic, especially at a heavy dose, what happens is your regular default mode network of your brain and how you interpret the world every day that your brain has created for you to exist in this world, that default mode network is a filter between the information that you need and the information that you don't need. When you disrupt that, you all of a sudden have access or incoming information from everywhere else in the universe that you're not used to interpreting. Those can be interpreted as hallucinations. So when you start seeing spirits or having a spiritual experience, or you are dipped into this pool of consciousness where nothing makes sense and you're seeing all these crazy wonky things, and you're like telecommunicating, and you don't know English anymore, but you can still think with your talk with your thoughts to other beings that you're interacting with, all of a sudden all that wonky shit that either gets chalked up to, oh, it's your brain on drugs, or two, you've now entered the spiritual realm. I wouldn't say you entered it. It's always around us. We just can't pick up on it because we're not tuned into that frequency. It's kind of like what people talk about, like dimensions, right? Like we're in third dimension. Well, what's the fourth dimension? Time. What's the fifth dimension? Space-time. Or they keep going with it. Those things are always there. You're not in a different dimension. We're constantly in every dimension. It's just that when you disrupt that default mode network, you are now accessing or interacting with the other levels that you normally wouldn't pay attention to because you're not tuned in that way. But again, I didn't know where this video was gonna go, so if I'm going off on tangents, so be it. But I get asked these questions frequently. I'm always asked how to microdose. I'm always asked, why Eris? Is your name not Andrew? We don't understand. I get it. You can call me whatever you want. Why psychedelics? Why do you take them? What are they good for? Can you go crazy? Yeah, you can. You can. If you take way too fucking much and you abuse them, yeah, you can absolutely drive yourself crazy. Just like you can take a hammer that's supposed to build a house and you can hit yourself in the face with it. That's a dumb idea. Don't do that. What else do people ask? I guess that's it. I wanted to make a video because I'm always writing about it, and I feel like there's only a handful of people that honestly like to read. Thank you to the couple people that do read those. It's kind of cool. But yeah, I hope somebody gets something out of this. If there are any more questions, I would like to make other videos. I keep being told, I've been talked to about make a podcast. My answer to that was I'd be a good guest on someone else's podcast because I can answer questions about myself one time. But I wouldn't want to be a podcast host because then I bring on other guests. I wouldn't just sit there and talk about myself over and over and over again. So podcasting I probably wouldn't do, but I guess you call this vlogging. I wanna educate people on the psychedelic experience. I don't get too textbook with it. I do lean more into what you call the spiritual side of it because of my personal experiences. And I like to try and articulate that because I know there's a quote Don Howard said, our mission is, the spiritual fucking woke people, is to describe the ineffable to the uninitiated. And what that means is, when you take a heavy dose, say like an ayahuasca or a wachuma, you go dose and you come back from ceremony and you just basically met God, and you have to somehow experience that to people who think you're just a crazy person who does drugs in the forest or in the jungle. And what you have to try to explain to them is, look, I'm just like you. I know it might sound crazy, but I went to this place that is renowned for doing this crazy magical shit, and I saw them do this crazy magical shit, and so did a group of other people, and it's undeniable. And you can also pay money to go there and experience this. Like, it's no secret. You can go do that if you're willing to sack up and have an experience, because that's what happens. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then you kind of have to live with that. And it's not a bad thing to live with. It's kind of like the whole Matrix deal. You want the red pill or the blue pill. You take the red pill, you can't unsee it. So I enjoy trying to articulate it, either by writing or having conversations with people. So I hope this video gets out to somebody, just makes them think a little bit, or inspires further conversation. Either or. I just wanted to talk about it, so thank you.